They thought humanity had run out of ships. Then the ocean started rising. The war had ended 20 years ago, and Earth had lost. That was the simple truth that every human child learned in school now. The Korath Dominion had come from the stars in ships larger than mountains, and humanity's small fleet of destroyers and carriers had fought for 6 months before the last ship was destroyed above the moon. After that, there was nothing left to fight with. Earth signed the Armistice of Geneva, and the planet became a protectorate of the Dominion. General Threxall Vorn stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devouring Light, and looked down at the blue and green planet turning slowly below him. He was tall for a Korath, with dark green scales that shimmered faintly under the bridge lights, and 4 eyes that could see in almost total darkness. He had been a young officer during the war. Now, 2 decades later, he was the military governor of the entire Sol system. "Report," he said to his aide, a smaller Korath named Sesk. "The humans continue their quota shipments on schedule, General," Sesk said. "Iron, rare earth metals, fresh water, nothing unusual." "And their fleet?" Sesk made a small clicking sound, which was how his people laughed. "General, they have no fleet. You destroyed it yourself, 20 years ago. The humans have a few patrol boats and some old aircraft. Nothing that could threaten even one of our smallest cruisers." Threxall nodded slowly. He had heard this report 1,000 times, and it never stopped feeling strange to him. A species that had once built starships now could not even leave its own solar system without Dominion permission. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like watching a caged animal that was too quiet. "Ascension Day approaches," Threxall said. "In 4 months, Earth will be formally absorbed into the Dominion, no longer a protectorate, but a full member world, bound by our laws forever. I want it to be perfect. Every ship in the Third Fleet will attend. Every camera in the galaxy will be watching." "It will be a great honor for the humans," Sesk said. Threxall did not answer. He was still looking at the ocean, blue and endless, covering most of the planet below. Something about it always bothered him, though he could never say exactly what. 6,000 kilometers below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in a place no Korath scanner had ever mapped correctly, Admiral James Whitfield sat in a small metal room and read the same message for the 3rd time. The message was short. It came from a source deep inside the Dominion's administrative network, planted there years ago by human intelligence. "Ascension Day confirmed. 4 months. Third Fleet will attend in full. Estimated 700 warships. This is the moment." Whitfield was 71 years old now. His hair was white, and his hands shook slightly when he was tired, which was most of the time. He had been a young captain when the war ended, one of the very few officers who survived the final battle above the moon. He remembered watching his own ship, the old carrier Enterprise, break apart in the black, remembered the escape pod, remembered floating for 3 days before a fishing boat found him. He had sworn, in that pod, that humanity would never again be caught without a fleet. Nobody in the Dominion knew what Whitfield and a handful of others had built in the years since. Nobody knew about Project Deluge. He stood up slowly and walked down the metal corridor of the base, past rooms full of sleeping engineers and off-duty crew, until he reached the observation deck. Through 6 inches of reinforced glass, he could see it, the thing they had built. It was not one ship. It was hundreds. They filled the trench as far as the lights could reach, resting silently on the ocean floor in their launch cradles. Dark hulls, built from alloys the Korath had never seen, because the Korath had never let humans study their metallurgy, and so humans had invented their own. Each ship was covered in a thin layer of living coral and algae, grown deliberately over years to hide their heat signatures and their metal from every kind of scan known to the Dominion. Whitfield had a name for the whole project in his head, though almost nobody else used it. He called it the Leviathan Fleet. "Couldn't sleep either, sir?" Whitfield turned. Commander Marcus Cole stood behind him, still in his work uniform, dark circles under his eyes. Cole was 38, born after the war started, and had never seen the sky without a Korath patrol ship somewhere in it. He had grown up in the Resistance the way other children grew up playing baseball. "I got the message from Command Sarah," Whitfield said. "Ascension Day, 4 months." Cole's jaw tightened. "Then it's really happening. It's really happening." Whitfield looked back through the glass at the sleeping fleet. 700 warships, they say. The whole Third Fleet, gathered right above our heads, thinking they're about to watch us sign our own chains forever. How many ships do we have ready? 412, Whitfield said. Not as many as they'll bring, but ours weren't built to fight the way theirs fight. Ours were built to fight the way we know how to fight, in the dark, close, and fast, using every trick a smaller force has ever used against a bigger one. Cole was quiet for a moment. 20 years, sir. 20 years hiding under the water, building this, training for this. Sometimes I still can't believe we're actually going to use it. We're not going to use it, Whitfield said. We're going to win with it. There's a difference. 200 meters above the trench, in a small coastal town in what used to be called California, a girl named Priya Malhotra walked to school, along a beach that was closed to swimmers, because the local Korath administrator said the water near the base was restricted for environmental reasons. Nobody in the town knew why the beach was really closed. Priya's mother worked at the base, though Priya only knew her mother had a government job that she never talked about. Priya was 12 years old, and like every human child of her generation, she had grown up under Korath rule. She saw their patrol drones fly overhead every day. She saluted a Korath officer once a week at the town hall, because that was the law now. She had never seen a human warship in her entire life, because as far as she knew, there were none. She did not know that her mother spent every night helping to calibrate the shield systems of 412 hidden warships lying in the dark beneath the waves she was forbidden to swim in. She did not know that in 4 months, everything she believed about her planet was going to change. At Dominion Central Command, a massive space station orbiting the Korath homeworld, High Overlord Zarek Meth reviewed the plans for Ascension Day with obvious pleasure. Zarek was old even by Korath standards. His scales faded to a pale gray-green, but his 4 eyes were still sharp, and his mind was sharper. 700 ships, he said to the officers gathered before him. The largest ceremonial fleet ever assembled for an annexation. I want every species in the Dominion to see this broadcast. I want them to understand what happens to a world that resists us, and then is finally, mercifully, brought into the light of Dominion civilization. General Vorn has confirmed the humans present no threat, Overlord, said one officer. Their military capacity was fully destroyed in the war. They have not built so much as a single armed vessel in 20 years, according to every inspection. Zarek made a satisfied sound. Good. Then Ascension Day will be exactly what it should be. A celebration, not a battle. He paused. Though I admit, Vorn, there is something about that planet I never fully trust. The humans surrendered too easily, some might say. And yet, 20 years of perfect compliance. Perhaps I am simply an old soldier who has forgotten how to trust peace. The humans are not like us, Overlord, Vorn said, who had joined the meeting by holographic transmission from the devouring light. They do not think in terms of generations, or patience. Our analysts tell us their culture values quick results. A 20-year plan would be almost unthinkable to them. Zarek nodded slowly, apparently satisfied by this answer. Vorn, watching from his ship, found himself less certain. He thought again of the ocean, blue and endless, and the strange feeling it gave him every time he looked at it. Back in the trench, deep beneath the restricted beach, Dr. Amara Chen made her way through the largest chamber of the base, a vast cavern of steel and rock that housed the flagship of the entire Leviathan fleet. The ship was called the Neptune's Fury, and it was 3 kilometers long, the largest thing humans had ever built, larger even than the Korath flagship above. Amara was the chief engineer of Project Deluge, though few outside the base knew her name. She had been a young graduate student when the war ended, and she had spent every year since designing weapons and shields using pieces of downed Korath technology, human ingenuity, and a stubbornness that refused to accept defeat as final. She found Admiral Whitfield and Commander Cole standing beneath the shadow of the Fury's hull. "Reactor cores are at 94% readiness," she reported. "We can push to full power within 6 weeks if we push the crews hard. Shield calibration is nearly complete on all 412 vessels." "And the launch systems?" Whitfield asked. Amara allowed herself a small smile. "That's the part I'm proudest of. When we launch, sir, every ship in this fleet is going to rise straight up through 6,000 meters of water, all at once, in under 4 minutes. The Korath have never seen anything move that fast through water. Their scanners won't even understand what they're looking at until it's already breaking the surface. And the ocean itself? Cole asked. You said something about that in your last report. 412 ships, most of them over a kilometer long, all rising at once from the deep trenches around the world, Amara said. The water they displace has to go somewhere. Sea levels near every launch site are going to rise, visibly, in a matter of minutes. It'll look like something out of an old disaster film. The Korath sensors above orbit will see it before they see us. They'll see the ocean itself starting to rise. Whitfield looked at the great dark hull of the Neptune's Fury, rising above them like a mountain of steel, and for the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to feel something close to hope. 4 months, he said quietly. Let's make sure we're ready. That night, as she did every night, Priya Malhotra looked out her window at the dark ocean before going to sleep. She did not know why, but lately, the water seemed different to her, though she could not say how. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe it was simply a 12-year-old girl growing tired of a world run by aliens who did not smile and did not explain themselves. She did not know that 4 months from that night, the entire world would learn the truth that had been hiding beneath the waves all along. She did not know that her mother, and thousands of others like her, had spent 20 years building the answer to a question the Korath had never thought to ask. They had assumed that because they destroyed humanity's ships once, humanity had no more ships to give. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 months remained before Ascension Day, and across the world, humanity kept up the appearance of a defeated species. Farmers in Kansas sent their grain shipments to Korath collection stations on schedule. Fishing fleets in Norway stayed away from certain marked zones in the North Sea without ever asking why. Office workers in Tokyo bowed to Korath administrators the same way they had bowed every day for 20 years. To any outside observer, Earth looked exactly like what the Dominion believed it to be: a quiet, obedient, broken world. Underneath that quiet surface, 412 warships were finishing their final preparations. Admiral Whitfield walked the length of the command deck aboard the Neptune's Fury, past rows of young officers working at glowing control panels. Most of them had never seen open sky as free people. Most of them had been born into occupation and trained since childhood for this one mission. He stopped beside a young lieutenant named Diego Ruiz, who was running diagnostics on the ship's main weapon array. "How does she look, Lieutenant?" Whitfield asked. "Better every day, sir," Ruiz said. "The plasma lances are testing at 98% efficiency now. Dr. Chen's team fixed the cooling problem we had last month." "Good," Whitfield said, "because in 3 months, we're going to need every percentage point we can get." He continued down the deck, thinking about the numbers Amara Chen had shown him the night before. 700 Korath warships were expected for Ascension Day, according to the last intelligence report. 412 human ships would rise to meet them. On paper, it looked like a losing battle. But Whitfield had learned long ago that paper never told the whole story. The Korath built their fleet for open, direct combat, ship against ship, firepower against firepower, and they had never lost a war fought that way in 300 years of expansion. But Project Deluge had never been designed to fight that kind of war. Every ship in the Leviathan fleet carried human-designed cloaking systems adapted from downed Korath tech, weapons built for close, fast strikes rather than long, slow trades of fire, and crews trained for 2 decades in a single, simple idea: hit hard, hit fast, and never let the enemy fight the battle they expected. At Dominion Central Command, High Overlord Zarek Meth reviewed the ceremonial plans for Ascension Day with his senior staff. A massive holographic model of the Sol system floated above the table, showing planned fleet positions. "The Third Fleet will arrive in Earth orbit 6 days before the ceremony," said Fleet Marshal Koran, a broad-shouldered Korath officer with battle scars across one side of his face. 712 warships, including the flagship Eternal Ascension, will form a full ceremonial ring around the planet. It will be the largest gathering of Dominion military strength ever displayed for a single world. "And the humans have no way to interfere?" Zarek asked. "None, Overlord," Koran said. "Their military strength was fully eliminated 20 years ago, and our monitoring stations have confirmed 0 unauthorized shipbuilding activity Anywhere on the planet. We inspect their factories regularly. We track every shipment of metal and fuel. There is nothing to worry about. Zarek nodded, though his 4 eyes lingered on the blue sphere at the center of the hologram, on the wide oceans that covered most of its surface. General Vorn, he said, addressing the hologram of the human systems governor, who had joined remotely. You have overseen this world for 2 decades. Tell me honestly, do you trust this peace? Vorn considered the question carefully before answering. Overlord, I have watched the humans closely for 20 years. They comply with every regulation. They meet every quota. Their culture has adapted to Dominion rule more completely than any other conquered world I have studied, and yet, Zarek prompted. There is a saying among the older human officers we still monitor, Vorn said. One of our translators found it in an old military record. It says, still waters run deep. I do not fully understand what it means, but I have never been able to stop thinking about it since I read it. Zarek made a dismissive sound. An old saying from a defeated species, General. Nothing more. Proceed with the preparations. Ascension Day will be a triumph, and this world will finally take its proper place within the Dominion. Vorn said nothing more, but as the meeting ended, and his hologram faded, he found himself once again looking at images of Earth's oceans, wide and blue, and endlessly patient, and the strange unease in his mind refused to leave him. Beneath the Pacific, in the largest cavern of the Deluge base, Dr. Amara Chen gathered the senior engineering staff for a final review of the launch sequence. Holographic diagrams filled the room, showing every one of the 412 ships and their assigned launch trenches around the world. We have identified 19 major launch sites, she explained, spread across every ocean on Earth. Each site has been selected because it sits above deep trench systems that our scanners confirm the Korath have never properly mapped. Their satellites see the surface. They have never seen what lies beneath it. What about detection risk during the final weeks? Asked one of the younger engineers, a woman named Fatima Hassan, who had helped design the fleet's cloaking systems. That's the real danger now, Amara admitted. As Ascension Day gets closer, Korath ships will increase their patrols, and their sensor stations in orbit will be watching Earth more closely than ever before, because they want everything to look perfect for the ceremony. We believe our cloaking holds against everything we've seen from them so far. But we've never tested it against 700 warships watching at once. Admiral Whitfield, sitting quietly at the head of the table, finally spoke. Then we don't give them a reason to look harder than they already are. Every crew stays disciplined. Every drill happens exactly on schedule. No early tests. No risks that aren't necessary. We have waited 20 years for this moment. We are not going to lose it in the final 3 months, because someone got impatient. The room was silent, the weight of the mission settling over everyone present. There's something else, Amara said, pulling up a new set of data. We've run the final simulations on the ocean displacement problem. When all 412 ships launch simultaneously, sea levels near the 19 launch sites will rise by an average of 2 meters within the first 90 seconds. In some of the narrower coastal areas, the rise could be higher, briefly. 2 meters, Whitfield repeated. That's going to be visible from orbit almost immediately. It is, Amara confirmed. Which means the moment we launch, the element of surprise starts running out fast. We'll have roughly 4 minutes of confusion before Korath sensors correctly identify what's happening. After that, everything depends on speed and coordination. Commander Cole leaned forward. Then we make those 4 minutes count. Every ship needs to break the surface and clear the atmosphere as fast as physically possible. No hesitation, no waiting for confirmation. The moment the signal goes out, everyone moves. Whitfield nodded slowly, looking around the room at the faces of the people who had dedicated their entire adult lives, and in some cases their entire lives period, to this single moment. 3 months, he said. Let's not waste a single day of them. In the small coastal town above the base, life continued in its quiet, watched rhythm. Priya Malhotra's mother, Dr. Kavita Malhotra, came home later and later each night, though she always claimed it was simply budget season at her government job. Priya had stopped asking questions months ago, though she noticed her mother's hands sometimes shook slightly at dinner, the way a person's hands shake when they are holding something too heavy for too long. One evening, walking home from a friend's house, Priya passed the Korath checkpoint near the restricted beach and saw something unusual. A young Korath soldier, barely more than what humans would call a teenager in Korath years, was staring out at the ocean, with all four of his eyes narrowed, as if he too sensed something he could not explain. "Something wrong with the water?" Freya asked before she could stop herself. She was not supposed to speak to Korath soldiers directly, but curiosity had always been stronger in her than fear. The young soldier glanced at her, seeming surprised that a human child had addressed him at all. "No," he said slowly, in the flat mechanical tone of the Dominion's translation devices. "Nothing wrong. I only felt something. A vibration perhaps, from very far below. Probably nothing." Priya looked out at the dark water, calm and endless under the evening sky, and for just a moment, she thought she felt it too, a deep and distant hum, like something enormous, breathing far beneath the waves. "Probably nothing," she agreed, and continued walking home, not knowing that she had just felt the faint tremor of 412 warships running their final engine tests 6,000 meters below her feet. As the third month began, General Threxall Vorn made an unscheduled inspection tour of Earth's major ocean regions, flying low over the Pacific in his personal shuttle. He told his staff it was simple due diligence before Ascension Day, a final check to make sure nothing had been overlooked. Privately, he could not explain why he felt drawn to do it. He stared down at the water for a long time as his shuttle passed over the exact coordinates of the deluge base, seeing nothing but blue water and white waves, utterly unaware of the mountain of steel and hope resting silently far below. "Nothing," he murmured to himself, echoing the young soldier's words, without ever knowing they had been spoken. "Probably nothing." He turned his shuttle back toward orbit, back toward the growing fleet of 700 warships gathering for the greatest triumph the Dominion had ever staged, never imagining that the ocean beneath him was already beginning, slowly and silently, to prepare itself to rise. Ascension Day arrived on a clear morning, with a sky so blue that it seemed almost designed for the occasion. High above Earth, the third fleet of the Korath Dominion had spent 6 days assembling into a massive ring around the planet. 712 warships hung in orbit, their hulls painted in ceremonial gold and black, engines glowing softly as they held perfect formation. At the center of the ring floated the Eternal Ascension, the largest ship in the entire Dominion Navy, 4 kilometers of curved black metal, built specifically for occasions exactly like this one. High Overlord Zarek Meth stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Ascension, looking down at the blue and green planet below, surrounded by his senior officers and a small army of camera drones broadcasting the moment across 1,000 worlds. "Today," Zarek said, his voice carried by translation devices to every species watching, "a new world joins the Dominion, not through conquest, but through 20 years of peaceful cooperation. Let this be remembered as proof that even the most stubborn species can learn the value of order." Down on the surface, in cities across the planet, humans gathered in public squares, as required by Dominion law, forced to watch the ceremony on massive screens. In the small coastal town above the deluge base, Priya Malhotra stood with her classmates in the town square, staring up at a screen showing the golden ring of warships circling their planet like a crown of chains. She did not know that her mother was not among the crowd that day. Dr. Kavita Malhotra was 6,000 meters below the ocean, standing at her station in the deluge base, watching a very different screen. "All stations report ready," Commander Cole said, his voice steady, despite the tension gripping every person in the command center of the Neptune's Fury. 19 launch sites confirmed. All 412 ships report full power and standing by. Admiral Whitfield sat in the command chair, looking at the tactical display showing the golden ring of Korath ships far above them in orbit. He had waited 20 years for this exact moment, and now that it had finally arrived, he found himself surprisingly calm. "Time to ceremony start?" he asked. 11 minutes, sir," Cole answered. "The Overlord's formal declaration of annexation is scheduled to begin then. Once he speaks the words, Earth becomes a full Dominion world under their law, permanently." Whitfield nodded slowly. "Then we launch at the 9-minute mark. Before he can finish that speech, they will already know exactly what kind of world they were dealing with." Dr. Amara Chen, standing beside the launch control station, checked her readings one final time. Reactor cores at 100% across the fleet. Cloaking systems holding steady. Launch tubes clear on all 19 sites. Send the signal to all ships, Whitfield said. Prepare for full fleet launch in 9 minutes. Across the world, in trenches beneath the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and dozens of smaller seas, the command was received simultaneously by 412 waiting crews. Engines that had been running quietly for 20 years began to build toward their true power for the very first time. Aboard the Eternal Ascension, High Overlord Zarek Meth began his formal declaration, exactly on schedule. By the authority granted to me as High Overlord of the Korath Dominion, he began, and in accordance with the Armistice of Geneva, signed 20 years ago by the leadership of the species known as humanity, I hereby declare the world known as Earth to be. He paused. Something on his console had flashed red. Overlord, said an alarmed sensor officer nearby, we are detecting an unusual reading. Sea levels across 19 separate locations on the planet's surface are rising rapidly. The readings do not make sense, Overlord. Zarek turned from his speech, 4 eyes narrowing at the strange report. Rising how? Storm activity? No storms detected, Overlord, the officer said, his voice climbing higher with confusion and the first edge of fear. The water is rising, as if something enormous is pushing it upward from below, all 19 locations, simultaneously. Far below, General Threxel Vorn was watching the ceremony from his own ship, the Devouring Light, positioned closer to the planet's surface than the main fleet. He heard the sensor officer's report over the shared command channel and felt every scale on his body go cold with sudden understanding. Show me live imagery, Vorn ordered. Now. The main view screen shifted to a live feed from a Pacific Ocean monitoring satellite. At first, it looked like nothing at all, simply an ocean under a clear sky. Then, slowly, the water at the center of the image began to swell, rising and rising, a dome of ocean forming as if some vast unseen hand was pushing it from beneath. Still waters run deep, Vorn whispered, the old human saying, finally making terrible sense to him. The dome of water broke apart. Deep beneath the surface, the Neptune's Fury and its escort of 11 other warships rose through the darkness of the Pacific Trench, engines burning with power that had been hidden for 2 decades. Above them, hundreds of other ships rose through their own launch trenches around the world, a silent, invisible fleet, finally coming to life all at once. Depth, 3,000 meters and rising, called out the navigation officer, speed increasing, all systems nominal. Admiral Whitfield gripped the arms of his command chair as the deck trembled beneath him, with the raw power of the ship's engines. Around him, the crew worked with the calm precision of people who had trained for this single moment for their entire adult lives. 2,000 meters, the navigation officer called. 1,500. On the main view screen, the darkness of the deep ocean began to lighten, faint traces of sunlight filtering down from the surface high above. 100 meters, the officer said, his voice tight with excitement. 50, 20, 10. The Neptune's Fury broke the surface of the Pacific Ocean in an explosion of white foam and spray, water cascading off its dark hull as it rose fully into the open air for the first time, followed immediately by 11 escort ships bursting through the waves around it. Around the world, at 18 other locations, the same scene repeated itself, hundreds of warships, tearing free of the ocean that had hidden them for 20 years, rising toward the sky on pillars of steam and seawater. In the coastal town square, Priya Malhotra felt the ground shake beneath her feet and heard a sound like distant thunder rolling in from the direction of the restricted beach. She turned, along with everyone around her, just in time to see an impossible sight rising above the horizon. Massive dark shapes, larger than any building she had ever seen, climbing out of the ocean and into the sky, trailing water and fire behind them. "Mom," she whispered, though she did not yet understand why that word came to her mind first. Aboard the Eternal Ascension, chaos had replaced the careful ceremony of moments before. High Overlord Zarek Meth stared at the tactical display as it filled, second by second, with new contacts, more ships appearing than his mind could immediately process. "Overlord," the sensor officer said, his voice shaking now. "We are reading 400 new contacts, possibly more. Vessel classifications unknown. They are rising from the ocean at 19 locations and climbing toward orbit at extreme velocity." "That is impossible," Zarek said, though even as he spoke the words, the evidence on the screen before him proved otherwise. "The humans have no fleet. Their military was destroyed 20 years ago. General Vorn confirmed this personally, year after year, inspection after inspection." On the devouring light, General Threxel Vorn watched the same impossible readings with a very different feeling than his overlord's disbelief. He felt something close to grim respect, mixed with the sharp, cold fear of a soldier who realizes he has badly misjudged his enemy. "Overlord," Vorn said, over the command channel, his voice carefully controlled, "I recommend we treat this as an active military threat and prepare the fleet for immediate combat readiness." "Combat readiness?" Zarek's voice cracked with disbelief and rising anger. "Against fishing boats and submarines, Vorn?" On the view screen, the first wave of human ships broke through the upper atmosphere, their hulls no longer wet with seawater, but instead glowing with the fierce orange light of atmospheric re-entry, weapon systems already beginning to charge, 412 warships rising to meet the golden ring of the Dominion's Third Fleet. Vorn looked at the tactical display, at the sheer number and size of the vessels appearing before him, ships that had clearly been designed and built and hidden with a patience and discipline he would never have believed the humans capable of, and he finally understood the true meaning of the words he had read so long ago. "Overlord," he said quietly, "I do not believe these are fishing boats." Above the peaceful blue planet that the Dominion had believed was finally, permanently theirs, the sky began to fill with warships that were never supposed to exist, and the golden ceremony of Ascension Day dissolved into the opening moments of the greatest battle Earth had ever fought. The battle began the moment the first human ships reached low orbit. Admiral Whitfield stood on the command deck of the Neptune's Fury as it climbed through the last thin layer of Earth's atmosphere, the golden ring of the Korath Third Fleet now visible directly ahead, 700 warships still holding their ceremonial formation, unprepared for what was rising to meet them. "Report," Whitfield said, his voice calm, despite the enormity of the moment. "All 412 ships confirmed in atmosphere or orbit, sir," Commander Cole answered. "Formation holding. Weapon systems fully charged across the fleet." Korath response? "Confused, sir," Cole said, a faint note of satisfaction in his voice. "Their formation is breaking apart. They're trying to reorganize into combat positions, but it's happening too fast. They weren't ready for this." Whitfield nodded. 20 years of planning had come down to this single truth. The Korath fought wars the way they had always fought wars, with overwhelming force arranged in careful, powerful formations, built to grind down any enemy through sheer size and firepower. They had never needed speed or surprise, because no one had ever surprised them before. "Signal the fleet," Whitfield said. "Execute deep strike as planned. Hit their command ships first." Aboard the Eternal Ascension, High Overlord Zarek Meth watched in stunned silence as human warships tore through his ceremonial formation like sharks through a school of smaller fish. The humans were not fighting the way Korath doctrine expected an enemy to fight. They were not lining up for slow exchanges of long-range fire. Instead, their ships moved in tight, fast groups, diving close to individual Korath vessels, before unleashing devastating point-blank strikes, and then peeling away before the larger ships could properly bring their weapons to bear. "Overlord, the righteous flame has lost main power," an officer called out. "The Silent Justice reports critical hull damage. We are losing ships faster than we can identify their attackers." "How is this possible?" Zarek demanded, gripping the edge of his console so tightly his claws scraped against the metal. They were nothing. 20 years of nothing. How did they build this? General Threxel Vorn, watching from the bridge of the devouring light, found himself thinking not of the Overlord's question, but of a young human girl he had never met, and a young soldier under his own command, who had felt a strange vibration in the water weeks ago, and dismissed it as nothing. The humans had built this fleet with patience the Dominion had never expected from them, hiding it in the one place Korath sensors had never properly learned to search, beneath the deep, dark water of an entire world's oceans. "Overlord," Vorn said, "I recommend immediate full engagement of the devouring light and my escort squadron. We cannot allow them to isolate and destroy individual ships. We must consolidate our formation and use our superior numbers before they can dismantle us piece by piece. Do it, Zarek snapped. Destroy them. Destroy all of them. This insult will not stand. Aboard the Neptune's Fury, Dr. Amara Chen watched the battle unfold across a dozen screens, monitoring the performance of systems she had spent 20 years designing. The Korath ships were beginning to consolidate, forming into tighter defensive clusters that would be harder to break apart, exactly as she had predicted they would once the initial shock wore off. Admiral, Korath formations are tightening, she reported. If they manage to fully reorganize, our speed advantage will matter less. We need to strike the command ships now, before they can coordinate a unified defense. Whitfield studied the tactical display, watching the golden ring of Korath ships slowly pulling together into a smaller, denser formation around the massive Eternal Ascension. He had planned for this moment for 2 decades, and he knew exactly what needed to happen next. Commander Cole, he said, signal the 12th and 14th squadrons. Time for the Trident strike. Cole's hands moved quickly across his console. Signal sent, sir. 40 human warships, previously holding position on the outer edge of the battle, suddenly surged forward in 3 coordinated groups, diving directly toward the heart of the Korath formation, where the Eternal Ascension floated at the center. Korath point defense weapons opened fire in a storm of energy bolts, but the human ships moved with a speed and precision built from 20 years of relentless simulation and training, weaving between the defensive fire with barely inches to spare. They're diving for the flagship, Vorn realized, watching the tactical display aboard the Devouring Light with growing alarm. Overlord, they mean to strike the Eternal Ascension directly. We must move our ships to intercept. Move them, Zarek ordered, his voice tight with something that had never before been present in his long, successful career. Fear. The Devouring Light and a dozen other Korath cruisers surged forward to block the human strike force, and for a moment, it seemed as if they might succeed. But the human ships had not come alone. As the Korath cruisers moved to intercept the Trident strike, they exposed their own flanks to a second wave of human vessels that had been holding position, cloaked, on the outer edges of the battle the entire time. Dr. Chen's cloaking systems, tested for 20 years in the silent dark of the ocean floor, performed exactly as designed. The battle raged for nearly 2 hours, a chaos of light and fire spreading across the space around Earth. Human ships struck fast and hard, then retreated, before the larger Korath vessels could bring their full weight of fire to bear. A pattern repeated again and again, across dozens of separate engagements happening simultaneously around the planet. On the ground, in the coastal town square, Priya Malhotra stood with hundreds of other townspeople, staring up at a sky filled with distant flashes of light and streaks of fire, some of them falling toward the ocean, as damaged ships, both human and Korath, spiraled out of the fight. Those are ours, an old man near her said quietly, tears in his eyes, as he watched the battle unfold above them. My God, those are actually ours. Priya did not fully understand what he meant, not yet, but something in his voice told her this was the most important day of her entire life. Aboard the Neptune's Fury, Admiral Whitfield watched as the tactical display slowly, steadily, began to shift in humanity's favor. The Korath still held a numerical advantage, but their losses were mounting far faster than his own, and their formation, so powerful in the slow grinding wars they had always fought, was proving unable to adapt to the fast, unpredictable tactics of an enemy fighting for its very existence. Admiral, Cole called out, the Eternal Ascension is attempting to withdraw toward the outer fleet perimeter. Its main weapon batteries are down to 60% capacity. Then we don't let it withdraw, Whitfield said. Concentrate the 3rd and 5th squadrons on cutting off its retreat path. If we can force the flagship to either fight or surrender, the rest of their fleet may follow its lead. As the order went out, General Threxel Vorn found himself piloting the Devouring Light directly into the path of the advancing human squadrons, placing his own ship between the retreating Eternal Ascension and its attackers. It was, he knew, likely to be his final act as a soldier of the Dominion. Overlord, he said over the command channel, his voice steady despite everything, get the flagship clear. I will hold them as long as I can. Vorn, no, Zarek began, but Vorn had already cut the channel, turning the full attention of his weapons toward the oncoming wave of human ships. The devouring light fought with a desperate courage that even Admiral Whitfield, watching from a distance, found himself respecting. But one cruiser, however skillfully commanded, could not hold back an entire squadron forever. Within minutes, its shields failed, and its weapons fell silent, drifting powerless in the space between the two great fleets. Vorn survived, barely, thanks to an emergency escape pod launched in the final seconds before his ship lost primary power completely. He watched from the pod's small window as the Eternal Ascension, its retreat successfully covered by his sacrifice, pulled back toward the edge of the battle, its overlord finally beginning to understand that Ascension Day was not going to end the way he had planned. As the 2-hour mark passed, High Overlord Zarek Meth stood on the damaged bridge of the Eternal Ascension, watching the tactical display show something he had never once considered possible in 300 years of Dominion expansion: the systematic, grinding defeat of a Dominion fleet by a species he had believed to be utterly disarmed. "Overlord," his remaining sensor officer said quietly, "we have lost 211 ships. The humans have lost 43. If this continues at the current rate, our remaining fleet will not survive the next hour of engagement." Zarek said nothing for a long moment, staring at the numbers, at the impossible, humiliating truth of them. "Send the signal," he finally said, his voice heavy with something he had never expected to feel toward this small blue world. "All remaining ships. Full retreat to the outer system rally point." Below, on the surface of the planet they had believed was finally, permanently theirs, the ocean had stopped rising. The 412 ships of the Leviathan fleet had done exactly what Admiral Whitfield had promised, 20 years ago, in the cold dark of a life raft, floating in the wreckage of humanity's first, failed war. Humanity had run out of ships once. It had never happened again. The retreat of the Korath Third Fleet took nearly 6 hours to complete. Admiral Whitfield watched from the command deck of the Neptune's Fury as the last damaged ships of what had once been 700 warships pulled away from Earth orbit, forming a ragged, broken column, heading toward the edge of the solar system. Behind them, they left wreckage scattered across near-Earth space, along with the burned-out hulls of ships that would never fly again, and something far more valuable to humanity than any single victory: proof, undeniable, and witnessed by cameras that had broadcast the entire battle to 1,000 worlds across the galaxy, that the Korath Dominion could be beaten. "Casualty report," Whitfield said quietly, though he already dreaded the answer. Commander Cole, his face pale with exhaustion, read from the console in front of him. 51 ships lost, sir. Approximately 3,200 crew members confirmed dead or missing. We're still searching for survivors from 12 of the destroyed vessels." Whitfield closed his eyes for a moment. 3,200 people, most of them younger than his own children would have been, who had spent their entire lives training in secret for a single day, and who would never see the free world they had died to help create. "They knew the risk," Whitfield said finally. "Every one of them chose this. We honor that, by finishing what we started." "Sir," Dr. Amara Chen said from her station, "General Vorn's escape pod has been recovered. He's requesting to speak with Fleet Command. He says he wishes to discuss terms." Whitfield considered this for a long moment. 20 years of hatred and hidden fury could have easily led him to refuse, to let the Korath general sit in his small pod and wonder about his fate. But Whitfield had not built the Leviathan fleet out of hatred. He had built it out of a simple refusal to let his species disappear. "Bring him aboard," Whitfield said. "Let's hear what he has to say." General Threxel Vorn stood on the bridge of the Neptune's Fury, under armed human guard, 4 eyes taking in the ship around him, with something that looked, to Whitfield's surprise, less like fear and more like professional curiosity. "You built all of this beneath the ocean," Vorn said, not quite a question. "For 20 years, while my people inspected your factories and monitored your shipments and congratulated ourselves on how completely we had disarmed you. We learned a lesson the day the war ended," Whitfield said. "We learned that a fleet destroyed once can be built again if the enemy never thinks to look in the right place. Still waters run deep," Vorn said, and something in his flat mechanical translator voice carried what might have been, in a human, a tired kind of respect. I read that saying weeks ago and dismissed it as nothing more than old poetry. I should have listened to it. What happens now, General? Whitfield asked. Your overlord has retreated with what's left of the Third Fleet. Our world just handed the Dominion its first true defeat in 3 centuries. That kind of thing tends to travel fast. Vorn was quiet for a moment before answering. The Dominion has never lost a fleet action of this size, Admiral. Word of this battle is already spreading to every world under our control, and to every world we have not yet conquered. High Overlord Zarek Meth's position will be, I believe, extremely difficult to defend after today. There will be consequences within Dominion leadership. There may be opportunities for your people, in the confusion that follows. And you? Whitfield asked. What happens to General Threxall Vorn? I commanded a defeat, Vorn said simply. In Dominion tradition, that carries its own consequences. I do not know what will happen to me. I suspect it does not matter as much as what happens to this planet now. 3 days after the battle, representatives of the remaining Dominion administration on Earth requested an emergency meeting with what they had, until recently, considered a powerless conquered population. The meeting took place not in a grand hall or a military command center, but in the same small coastal town where Priya Malhotra had watched the battle unfold from her school's town square. Admiral Whitfield stood at a podium in front of a crowd that had grown far beyond the town's own residents, as news crews and curious citizens had traveled from across the region once word spread about where the historic meeting would take place. Priya stood near the front of the crowd with her mother, who had finally, after 20 years of secrecy, been able to tell her daughter the truth about her government job. For 20 years, Whitfield said, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd through simple speakers, no translation devices necessary this time. We told ourselves a story. We told ourselves that Earth had lost its fleet and that all we could do was survive quietly until something changed. But that was never quite true. We never lost our fleet completely. We simply hid it, in the one place we knew no one would think to search, and we waited, and we worked, and we trusted that the day would come when hiding would no longer be necessary. He paused, looking out over the crowd, at faces that ranged from disbelief to open tears, to something that looked very much like pride. That day is today, he continued. The Korath Dominion suffered its first true military defeat in 3 centuries above our skies, 3 days ago. We do not yet know exactly what comes next. The Dominion is a large and powerful organization, and Earth remains a small planet in a very large galaxy. But we have proven something today that I believe will matter for a very long time. We have proven that we were never as helpless as they believed. We were never as helpless as even some of us believed. The crowd was silent for a long moment, and then, slowly, it began to grow into something else. Cheering, at first scattered, then building into a wave that rolled through the entire square. In the months that followed, the true shape of the new world slowly began to take form. The Korath Dominion, humiliated by its defeat and thrown into internal political turmoil, withdrew its remaining occupation forces from Earth entirely, rather than risk another confrontation with the Leviathan fleet. High Overlord Zarek Meth was quietly removed from his position within a year, replaced by leadership more interested in avoiding further conflict with the small, stubborn world that had humiliated them so completely. General Threxall Vorn, to the surprise of many, remained on Earth by his own choice, formally requesting asylum from Dominion authority. He became, over time, an unlikely bridge between two species who had spent 20 years as conqueror and conquered, offering his knowledge of Dominion politics and strategy in exchange for a place in humanity's new, uncertain future. The Leviathan fleet did not disband after its victory. Instead, it became the foundation of Earth's new solar defense force. Its 412 original ships, joined over the following years by newer vessels, built openly now, in shipyards that no longer needed to hide beneath the ocean floor. Admiral Whitfield, finally allowed to grow old in peace, spent his final years training a new generation of officers, among them a young cadet named Priya Malhotra, who had decided, after watching the sky fill with impossible ships on the day of ascension, that she wanted to spend her own life making sure Earth would never again need to hide its strength in secret. Dr. Amara Chen continued her work in shipbuilding and defense technology, no longer forced to work in darkness and secrecy, her name finally becoming known and respected across a planet that had once had no idea how much it owed to 20 years of quiet, patient engineering. Years later, on the anniversary of what humanity now simply called the Rising, Admiral Priya Malhotra, no longer the young girl who had once stood confused in a town square, gave a speech to a new class of graduating officers at the Solar Defense Academy, built on the very site of the old restricted beach where she had grown up. They believed we had run out of ships, she told the assembled cadets, standing before a memorial wall listing the names of the 3,200 crew members who had given their lives on that first day. They believed 20 years of quiet compliance meant we had accepted defeat forever. They were wrong, because they never understood something simple about the ocean, and about us. She paused, looking out at the water beyond the academy, calm and blue and endless, the same ocean that had once hidden an entire fleet in its depths. The surface can look calm for a very long time, she said, while something enormous is being built beneath it, waiting patiently for the right moment to rise. Never mistake quiet for weakness. Never assume that because you cannot see a thing, it does not exist. That lesson cost the Korath Dominion an entire fleet, and it is a lesson this academy exists, to make sure no one ever needs to teach us again. The cadets before her, born into a free earth that had never known occupation, listened closely, carrying forward a story that had begun 20 years before any of them were born, in the cold dark of a life raft, with a young officer's simple, stubborn promise that humanity would never again be caught without a fleet. The ocean, calm and patient as ever, stretched out beyond the academy toward the horizon, keeping its own quiet counsel, the way it always had, and the way, humanity now understood, it always would.